The clock on the hospital wall ticked slowly, its faint, rhythmic sound filling the otherwise silent nursery. It was just past midnight on a chilly October night in 1999, when the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual across the cold-tiled floors of St. Mary's Hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting an eerie glow over the rows of cribs lined up like sentinels in the small, locked room. Caroline Lowen adjusted the blanket over the tiny baby in crib number 7, her worn hands trembling slightly. She had been working the night shift for nearly 6 years, and never had she felt a chill like this, one that crawled beneath her skin and whispered that something was wrong. The baby was only 3 weeks old. Ashley Summers, daughter of a young couple from the city, was supposed to be safe here, cradled in the warm embrace of the hospital nursery. But tonight, Caroline sensed an unsettling void, a silence heavier than the usual hum of machines and muffled cries. Caroline glanced at the security monitor mounted in the corner. The feed was grainy, flickering between static and an indistinct black and white image. For reasons unknown, the cameras had gone offline 15 minutes earlier. The hospital's IT department would blame it on a technical glitch, but Caroline suspected otherwise. She had checked the system twice during her shift, and both times the monitors had worked fine. Her heart hammered as she walked slowly to Ashley's crib, only to find it empty. The tiny blanket lay crumpled at the foot of the crib, stained faintly with the scent of baby powder and something else, a faint trace of perfume she didn't recognize. Panic rose in Caroline's chest like a tide. She scanned the nursery, but the heavy metal door was locked from the inside. No other babies were missing. The windows were small and barred. There was no way anyone could have simply walked in or out unnoticed. Caroline's breath quickened. She pressed the emergency button near the door, summoning security. Minutes later, a team flooded the ward. Officers questioned Caroline, the parents, and the few night staff. No one saw or heard anything suspicious. The parents were frantic, their pleas haunting the sterile halls. An extensive search was launched, but no sign of Ashley was ever found. 2 days later, the local news picked up the story. Baby vanished from locked nursery in St. Mary's Hospital. It was a mystery that gripped the community. The police called it an abduction, though no ransom demand followed. Surveillance footage was missing for a crucial 15 minutes, and the hospital administration remained tight-lipped. Weeks turned into months. The investigation stalled, and the case grew cold. The only clue left behind was a single charred pacifier found months later in the hospital's incinerator ash, an item that would become a haunting symbol of the unsolved tragedy. But what had happened that night? Carolyn sat at home days after the incident, her hands shaking as she stared blankly at the wall. The hospital had placed her on administrative leave pending the investigation. She replayed the events in her mind, desperate for any detail she might have missed. Her phone rang suddenly, cutting through the silence. It was Detective Mark Harding. "We're reopening some questions about the night Ashley vanished," he said gravely. "There's something you need to know, something that didn't come up in the initial reports." Carolyn's stomach dropped. "What is it?" she whispered. "There was a contractor who came in late that night, around the time Ashley disappeared. His name's Leonard Leo Crandall. He was hired to weld shut the incinerator hatch. Strange timing, isn't it?" Caroline shook her head, confused. "I don't understand. Why would someone weld the incinerator shut in the middle of the night?" "That's exactly what we're trying to figure out." The investigation took a new turn. Records showed that Leonard Crandall was no ordinary contractor. His background was murky, with no clear ties to the hospital. Even stranger, a few years later, a woman named Sarah Lee became head nurse at St. Mary's, and documents suggested she and Leonard claimed to be siblings. But hospital staff had no memory of any family relationship. Detective Harding was convinced something more sinister was buried beneath the hospital's polished exterior. "Caroline, I need you to remember everything. Anything unusual about Sarah Lee, about Leonard, anything you might have noticed but ignored at the time." Caroline frowned. "Sarah always seemed distant, almost obsessed. She never had children of her own, But there was something about the way she watched the babies, like she wanted to protect them, or maybe control them. Detective Harding's voice dropped to a whisper. Some say Sarah had secrets, secrets she would kill to keep. The hospital carried on as usual, but whispers of the past lingered like shadows. Ashley Summers' disappearance remained a wound that refused to heal, a dark thread woven into the fabric of St. Mary's. And somewhere, buried in the ashes of the incinerator, lay the haunting truth waiting to be uncovered. The years had passed quietly at St. Mary's Hospital, the eerie mystery of baby Ashley Summers fading into whispered rumors and cold case files gathering dust. But in the fall of 2023, something unexpected tore open the fragile silence. It started with a routine maintenance request. The hospital's aging furnace, the massive incinerator used to dispose of medical waste, was malfunctioning. The technician called in was Grace Miller, a sharp-eyed and no-nonsense maintenance expert known for her meticulous work. When Grace arrived, she immediately sensed something off. The incinerator's access hatch was jammed tight. Despite her experience, Grace couldn't budge it. The metal seemed warped, fused in a way that defied explanation. "I've never seen anything like this," she muttered to herself. Calling for backup, she managed to pry open the hatch an inch, just enough to glimpse inside. What she saw sent a chill down her spine. Among the charred remnants of medical refuse lay a small melted object, a baby's pacifier fused with an identification tag. The metal tag was partially readable, scorched but still bearing a name, Ashley S. Grace's heart pounded. Could it be? The hospital administration was quick to suppress the news, but whispers leaked out. The pacifier was sent for forensic analysis, and rumors began to swirl. Leading the hospital now was Sarah Lee, the head nurse who had arrived quietly some years after the tragedy and rapidly risen through the ranks. Yet few knew anything about her past. She was guarded, evasive, a ghost from a forgotten chapter. When questioned about the pacifier, Sarah's reaction was chilling. Her eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "That's an old item, probably from a previous batch of waste. The incinerator's been repaired and inspected multiple times since then." But Grace and Detective Harding were not convinced. Records showed that the incinerator's access hatch had been welded shut only hours after Ashley's disappearance, a fact never previously disclosed. Worse yet, the man who performed the welding, Leonard Crandall, vanished soon after the incident. His name never appeared on official hospital rosters, and Sarah Lee's personnel file indicated a curious connection. Leonard was listed as her brother, but hospital staff had never heard Sarah mention him. No one had ever met Leonard except for brief visits years ago, which many dismissed as contractor work. The deeper the investigation went, the more questions piled up. Who was Sarah Lee? Where had Leonard come from? And why had the incinerator been sealed so abruptly? Grace, fueled by a sense of justice, decided to dig into Sarah Lee's past. Her first discovery was troubling. Sarah had no records prior to 2000, no birth certificate, no college transcripts. It was as if she appeared from nowhere, fully formed and polished. More unsettling were the whispers among old hospital employees, now retired or gone. Some recalled a mysterious nurse who arrived suddenly, bypassing typical hiring protocols. Sarah was said to be obsessive about infant care, often seen wandering the neonatal ward late at night, checking on babies long after her shifts ended. But she never had children of her own. Grace interviewed a few former staff. "She was strange," said Linda, an ex-nurse. "She kept talking about protecting the innocent. But there was fear, too, like she was hiding something." Another former orderly remembered a heated argument between Sarah and Leonard shortly before his disappearance. "Something about the secret," he recalled. "They seemed scared, desperate." Meanwhile, Detective Harding uncovered more troubling evidence. Hospital logs indicated that Leonard Crandall had been hired under a false identity. He was an expert welder, but with a criminal past involving arson and child endangerment charges. Charges mysteriously dropped. Had Leonard been hired to cover something up? Or worse, to help hide a terrible secret? Sarah Lee's sudden rise to head nurse after Leonard vanished seemed suspicious. Had they worked together to orchestrate Ashley's disappearance? Or was Sarah merely cleaning up the mess? The official story remained sealed behind hospital walls and bureaucratic red tape. But Grace and Harding pressed on, determined to unravel the tangled web. One night, Grace was working late in the maintenance wing when she noticed the hospital's security cameras had been disabled again, this time deliberately. Her heart pounded as she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, but the corridor was empty. Minutes later, she found a note taped to the furnace door. "Stop digging, or you'll burn with the past." Grace felt a chill that ran deeper than the cold October air. She knew now that the truth was more dangerous than she ever imagined. Detective Mark Harding sat at his cluttered desk, the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating a stack of old hospital personnel files and faded photographs. The deeper he dug, the more the story twisted into a web of deceit, false identities, and shadowy relationships. The most perplexing thread was the so-called brotherhood between Leonard Crandall and Sarah Lee. Officially, they were siblings, at least that's what hospital records claimed, but nothing else matched. Harding pulled up Leonard's employment records, or rather, what little existed. Leonard had been brought in at the last minute, hired to weld shut the incinerator hatch hours after baby Ashley's disappearance. No prior ties to the hospital, no verifiable background, just a name and a job. Then there was Sarah Lee, head nurse and sister, who emerged shortly after Leonard's sudden vanishing act, stepping into a role of influence with uncanny ease. But what did the staff say? Harding interviewed former nurses and janitors who remembered both. Several mentioned that Leonard had no family visiting, no friends. Sarah never spoke of him in personal terms, and oddly, the hospital's human resources had no documentation on their supposed relationship. When Harding tried to trace Leonard's family tree, he hit a wall. No birth certificates, no parents, no siblings. It was as if Leonard Crandall had been conjured out of thin air. The brotherhood was a fabrication, a false alibi cloaked in paperwork. The detective turned his attention to Sarah Lee's mysterious past. Records showed she had started at the hospital as a temporary nurse in 2000, a year after Ashley vanished. But even then, her background was vague and suspiciously clean. No college transcripts, no references. Further digging revealed Sarah's real name might be something else entirely. Several aliases appeared in other states, connected to abandoned hospitals and closed child care facilities with murky histories. One name kept resurfacing, Evelyn Marsh. Sarah Lee was Evelyn Marsh. Evelyn had vanished from a small town in Oregon nearly 10 years before showing up at St. Mary's. Her disappearance had been unexplained, and local authorities never reopened the case. Harding's gut twisted. Could Sarah or Evelyn be involved in Ashley's disappearance? Meanwhile, Grace Miller was gathering her own evidence. She tracked down former contractors and employees linked to Leonard Crandall. They painted a disturbing picture. Leonard was secretive, often seen meeting with a woman matching Sarah's description. They spoke in hushed tones about a project and keeping things quiet. One old welder, Mike, recalled a heated argument between Leonard and Sarah just days before the incinerator was welded shut. Leonard was scared, Mike said. He didn't want to do whatever it was Sarah asked, but she was insistent, cold as ice. Grace's fingers trembled as she read through the transcripts. It was clear that Sarah and Leonard were partners in something sinister. But what? Detective Harding revisited the incinerator room at the hospital late one evening. The metal hatch was scarred and welded shut, but faint marks suggested someone had tried to force it open recently. He noticed faint scorch marks near the edge, old but freshly painted over. As he traced his flashlight over the cold metal, his eyes caught a tiny, almost invisible scratch. He crouched and found an engraving, a date, 10/12/1999, the night Ashley vanished. Below it, a barely legible message, "She's not forgotten." Harding's pulse quickened. The hospital was hiding more than just the truth. Someone wanted to send a message. Back at St. Mary's, Sarah Lee's office was a shrine of secrecy. Hidden behind a false panel was a box filled with old photographs, medical charts, and a worn journal. In her handwriting, Sarah had chronicled her obsession with babies, not just as a nurse, but as someone who believed she could save them by any means necessary. Her notes mentioned sacrifices and cleansing fires, cryptic words that sent a shiver down Grace's spine when she stumbled upon them during a covert search. Sarah's fixation was no secret. It was madness disguised as devotion. Detective Harding confronted Sarah at her office the next morning. "Why did you weld the incinerator hatch shut?" he demanded. Sarah's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. "To protect the innocent," she whispered, "to keep the darkness contained." "But Ashley," Harding pressed, "what happened to her?" Sarah's lips trembled. "Some babies are lost, but their souls aren't." The conversation ended abruptly when Sarah slipped away, leaving Harding with more questions than answers. As the pieces fell into place, Harding realized this was not just a case of a missing baby. It was a story of obsession, manipulation, and a twisted sisterhood forged in shadows. The brotherhood lie was only the beginning. The autumn wind rattled the hospital windows as Grace Miller stood outside the old maintenance building, clutching a faded folder she'd borrowed from a long-forgotten archive. Inside were files she hoped would finally shed light on Sarah Lee's past, the nurse with no history, the woman shrouded in silence. As Grace flipped through the brittle pages, a pattern emerged. Name changes, fabricated credentials, erased records. Sarah Lee, or rather Evelyn Marsh, had been living a carefully constructed lie for years. But why? A memory surfaced from an interview Grace had done weeks earlier. "Evelyn was different," said an ex-coworker from Oregon, her voice trembling. "She loved babies, yes, but there was this darkness, like she was haunted. She said she could hear them, even when they were gone." Grace's breath caught. Haunted. The word fit the strange aura Sarah, Evelyn, exuded, the obsession, the secrets, the cold devotion. Inside the hospital, the furnace room remained off-limits, a silent monument to the secrets it held. The welded hatch was more than metal and fire. It was a barrier between the past and the truth. Grace remembered the cryptic phrase etched on the hatch. "She's not forgotten." Who was she? Was it Ashley Summers or someone else? Meanwhile, Detective Harding continued piecing together Sarah's trajectory through the hospital. Sarah had rapidly climbed the ranks after Leonard Crandall's disappearance. Staff whispered that she controlled the nursery with an iron will, demanding absolute loyalty. But why? What drove her? Documents uncovered by Harding suggested Sarah had suffered a personal tragedy, a stillbirth years before arriving at St. Mary's. The grief had fractured her mind, creating an obsession with protecting infants, or perhaps controlling their fates. Her journal entries painted a disturbing portrait, mentions of cleansing flames, rebirth through fire, and sacrifices for purity. Was Sarah a grieving mother gone mad, or something darker? Grace decided to confront the head nurse directly. She found Sarah in the neonatal ward, quietly watching over sleeping babies. Her eyes, once sharp and commanding, now seemed distant, haunted. "Sarah," Grace began, "why did you weld the incinerator hatch shut that night?" Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "Some things are better left buried," she said softly. "The fire cleanses. It's mercy, not cruelty." Grace shivered. "Mercy?" Sarah nodded slowly. "The hospital is a sanctuary, but sanctuaries have shadows." That night, Grace snuck into the hospital's old storage room, a place where forgotten equipment and files gathered dust. Among them, she found a rusted box marked Ashley Summers. Inside lay a brittle baby blanket, a charred pacifier, and an old hospital bracelet, the same that had been partially melted and found in the furnace ashes. Grace's hands trembled as she lifted the bracelet, the cold metal still bearing Ashley's name and the date of birth. The past wasn't just a memory. It was a secret burning quietly beneath the surface, waiting to ignite. Back in her office, Sarah Lee sat alone, whispering the lullaby once more. Her voice was soft, almost a plea. "Sleep now, little one. The fire will keep you safe." But who was she protecting? And who was truly lost in the flames? The forensic lab was silent, except for the hum of machines and the occasional beep signaling progress. Grace Miller sat anxiously across from Dr. Evelyn Grant, the lead forensic scientist, as the pieces of evidence from the incinerator were carefully examined. The charred pacifier and the fused ID tag had been sent for DNA analysis, but the results weren't promising. The fire damage had degraded much of the genetic material, leaving only fragments behind. Yet, with modern techniques, Dr. Grant hoped to reconstruct a partial profile. Hours later, the test results came in. The DNA on the pacifier matched none other than Ashley Summers. Grace felt a wave of disbelief and sorrow wash over her. After 24 years, the missing baby was finally identified, not in life, but in ashes. Detective Harding sat in his office, piecing together the new information. The incinerator had been welded shut mere hours after Ashley's disappearance. Had her remains been burned to hide a crime, or was there some twisted rationale behind it? Harding's phone buzzed. "Mark," said Dr. Grant's voice, urgent and cautious. "We found more than just Ashley's DNA. Traces of another individual were on the pacifier. A woman's DNA, possibly someone who handled the item regularly." "Any leads?" Harding asked. "Not yet, but we've narrowed it down. We're running it against hospital staff databases now." Meanwhile, Sarah Lee was nowhere to be found. After the news broke about the DNA match, she had vanished without a trace. Her office was cleared out, her personal belongings gone. It was as if she had disappeared into the shadows she once controlled. Grace and Harding feared the worst. Had Sarah taken Ashley's story with her? Or, worse, was she responsible for the baby's death? The hospital was rocked by media frenzy. Questions flooded in. How could such a cover-up happen? Who was protecting Sarah? And why had the hospital allowed the incinerator to be welded shut in the first place? Whistleblowers came forward, recounting strange events and silenced voices. Grace found herself haunted by a question she couldn't shake. What had driven Sarah to such lengths? Had it been grief, madness, or something far darker? The answer might lie hidden in the fire's ashes and in Sarah's secrets. As the investigation intensified, a new clue surfaced. A pager was found wedged deep in the hospital's sewage pump, the same model that Sarah had used years ago. Its screen flickered with a looping message, "OR3 now." Grace and Harding exchanged grim looks. The past was not done with them yet. Detective Harding and Grace Miller stood silently outside the quiet nursing home on the outskirts of town. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of burning leaves. After months of searching, their trail had led here, to a faded building where time seemed to stand still. Inside, an elderly woman sat by the window, her eyes clouded but her lips moving softly. The nurse attending her looked up as Harding and Grace entered. "This is Sarah Lee," the nurse said softly. "She's been here for a few months, early onset dementia. She doesn't speak much, but sometimes she hums a lullaby." Harding approached slowly. The woman's gaze lifted, briefly steadying. "Do you remember Ashley Summers?" Harding asked gently. Her eyes flickered with recognition, then clouded over again. Grace noticed a small anklet bracelet on Sarah's frail wrist, a child's bracelet, tarnished but unmistakably similar to the one found in the furnace ashes. A soft melody began, the same lullaby Sarah had whispered for years. It was haunting, filled with sorrow and regret. In the nurse's room, hidden beneath worn sheets, Grace found an old tape recorder. The tape inside contained a recording, a mother's voice singing that same lullaby, distorted but unmistakably genuine. The mother of Ashley Summers. It was a message recorded the night Ashley vanished, a plea for protection, love, and forgiveness. Sarah had kept the tape, the bracelet, and the memory, a secret she had carried for decades. Harding pieced together the tragic truth. Sarah, or Evelyn Marsh, had lost her own child years before and had been consumed by grief. Obsessed with protecting babies, she had become dangerously unhinged. The night Ashley disappeared, Sarah tried to save her in her own twisted way. Fearing neglect or harm, she had taken Ashley from the nursery, but a tragic accident led to the baby's death. Panicked, Sarah and Leonard had conspired to hide the truth, welding the incinerator hatch shut to dispose of the evidence. But guilt and madness eventually consumed Sarah. Now, in her final days, Sarah was trapped between memory and oblivion. Her lullaby a haunting echo of a lost child and a love twisted by pain. Grace looked at Harding, tears in her eyes. "Some wounds never heal." Harding nodded solemnly. "But the truth, it finally found its way home." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a lullaby, drifting softly through the trees. The past was laid to rest, but the memory of Ashley Summers would never be forgotten.